Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the RotoGrinders So Rare podcast. I am your host, as always, Sean PSU fans to Newsham. Joining me for a second time this week, someone who is now no longer a rookie to shows and podcasts, Alex Fear My Turtle Heart. And Alex, how you doing today?
Doing great. So today we're going to get into how to make better lineups, and with this huge game week coming up, I think what we'll talk through can help some people kind of make some decisions and then get those lineups submitted for this huge game week coming up this weekend.
Definitely. Yeah. So, what Alex just alluded to today, we are going to spend the day talking on lineup construction. Obviously, Alex and I come from the DFS space where we have been building lineups for a living for the last decade. And it's something that you look at so rare and you notice a lot of people, we notice, some other people may not notice, but we notice people just making massive blunders that are costing themselves thousands upon thousands of dollars each and every week. And we're going to try to give everyone ideas on sort of how to avoid costing yourself thousands upon thousands of dollars every week, if that is something that is possible. Sometimes you're going to have to take some risks. Sometimes you do not have to take risks. So we'll be talking about different situations, and we will even go through some mock lineup building at the end of the show today with Alex's gallery and how to sort of go things. So, Alex, you ready to just jump into it here?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things is making lineups is much different based on your gallery size. So like when I first started out, I just barely had, like, you're not making decisions, like you're just trying to get a live lineup in with everybody playing. So you're maybe making one or two decisions each game week because you just barely have enough cards to submit a lineup or two. But once you start building out your gallery, you have more and more options. And then once the fall hits and you're kind of coming into all the top European leagues and all the challenger leagues starting up, and now all of a sudden you have a much larger pool to pick from. You're deciding where you want to play your cards, if you want to play them in the challenger, or if you want to mix and match in global, where to prioritize. There's really a lot to kind of discuss here in terms of going through. So I mean, the first item on the list is really just like knowing the matchup itself. So I think everybody, they can't be an expert in every league. So you really want to look at the betting odds as a starting point to understand generally what the matchup is. So, Sean, when you're looking at odds, are you making any considerations and viewing those odds differently based on position, or what are you exactly looking for when you're checking out the odds of all the games that impact you that game week?
Yeah, so for me personally, I'm going to care more about the odds for the goaltenders and like attacking players, whereas a defensive midfielder and center back may not matter as much. They still might be more beneficial in a positive game flow matchup than
Yeah,
that.
just to clarify, you're saying that dog goalkeepers are significantly worse, correct?
Yes, the way that the So Rare scoring is for a goalie to really do well, you want a goalie to have a good chance at a clean sheet. And to get a clean sheet, they need to give up 0 goals, which therefore means the bigger of a favorite they are, the more likely they are to do that. And I'm going to say something that I will, Alex, I don't know if you fully agree with this. I think you do, but you don't need to be perfect when looking at stuff like this. Even statistics, you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to spend 10 hours deciding like if this guy really is expected to score 10.1 points or this guy is expected to score 10.2 points. You just need to be like, all right, this guy's expected to score around 10 points and then move on. And like that's how your brain needs to work with things. Similar with the betting markets. Like if we look at RotoWire, for example, we would be able to see that a team is projected to score like 2.85 goals or another team's expected to score 2.65 goals. I just need to know like those are similar expectations and it's not that big of a deal, or those are significantly not the same expectations. So perfection is not necessary in terms of statistics when it comes to building so rare lineups to me. Do you agree with that, Alex, or are you more like anal about that stuff and want to make sure you know everything exactly to a T?
No, I don't. I think you should try to avoid like paralyzing yourself on like just one decision where no matter how much time you spend on it, you're not going to most likely get to a better point or get more information to make that decision. I think it's important to get like the high level context and then understand the range of outcomes and then make decisions fairly quickly from there. Certainly, you can always circle back and run through your lineups again and tinker with them a bit, but generally, you just want to get the high level context of that specific play.
Correct. And other things might come into factor as well when it comes to stacking and correlation that might impact your decisions. And like Alex said, and I'm the same way. We talked about my gallery is a bit bigger than most people's. I end up in a certain situation where I just don't have a choice, and it's like I'm playing this group regardless. And in terms of goalies, like a goalie can concede, and if he sees a lot of shots, he can still have a really strong game. Like I see goalies have 50 to 65 points week in, week out, where they give up 1 or 2 goals. They just see a lot of shots and made quite a few saves. Like I know Dayton Kook for Mechelen in Belgium last week had like 63 points, and they conceded a goal or 2. So it's not out of the question that can happen. But so for me personally, I always start my week with looking at Pinnacle. So I just use Pinnacle Sportsbook. That's just where I use. You can use whichever sportsbook you want or wherever you want. And again, like I use English system, American odds. I don't use the decimal odds or anything like that. And we're just going to use for this sake, because I know Alex has a lot more MLS cards and other things. And at the end, we'll mock some lineups up with MLS cards. So I'm just going to use the MLS. So like as you see, there's all these divisions. So like on a given week, I will open up every division tab and get a feel for like what to expect from each individual game. So we'll pull up the USA and then Major League Soccer betting for this game week, and we'll see. So we're not going to have it for the weekend because they all still play tonight. But if I start looking through this, Alex, who are some of the goalies that you have in the MLS?
Tyler Mueller. I have a couple of good old Brad Guzans. Amelia from Kansas City.
Yeah, so as we're looking, so Mueller played yesterday, so he won't have odds up. But so if we're looking, we see that Kansas City is the biggest favorite on the entire week. So that's a really favorable matchup for Tyler Mueller going into the thing. And for me personally, I use the handicap. I just like to see how big of a favorite a team is. Obviously, a game where there's only expected to be like 2.5 goals has a lot less expectancy for goals than a game that has 3.25 goals. But for me, I just want to see how big of a favorite a team is. If a team is a massive favorite, I know they can get a clean sheet, and that's all I really care about. I don't care about being like, well, this team's expected 0.8 goals against compared to 0.9 goals against elsewhere. Similarly, looking up, Brad Guzan has a great matchup. Both of these guys are at home. We see Guzan is expected to win as well against Toronto. They're favored to win the game outright. And they're a decent-sized favorite as well. So, like, you can just look at this, and like I said, like, you don't need to be perfect. I just need to look at this and look through my goalies. Like, let's say I have a goalie from Dallas and a goalie from Inter Miami, and then the two that Alex mentioned. So I'm going to look at it and be like, all right, Tyler Miller's biggest favorite, Guzan's second biggest favorite.
I do have a Mueller, by the way, for Dallas, and we'll probably get that with the lineup because also have Hollingshead. So.
There you go. And so then I look and I'm like, all right, Dallas is third, and then Inter Miami, or I'm sorry, like let's say it's just on DC United. So like, and you do probably have a Hamid, he's just injured right now. So I'd be like, all right. So in terms of just pure ranking of like what I would prioritize with nothing else factored in, I would probably consider to go Sporting KC 1, Atlanta United 2, Mauer 3 with Dallas, and then DC United 4. Is that similar? Is that sort of like how you would look at it?
Yeah, definitely. And another thing I do when I'm looking through the odds, I'm definitely keeping in mind what goalies I have, but also I want to kind of put in my head what field players I have against my goalie that week. Because obviously you're looking for a clean sheet with your goalie. So if you're playing an attacking player versus your goalie in the same lineup, you're certainly capping your upside because for the forward to hit, they're going to need a decisive, which in turn takes away the clean sheet. So like I'm kind of going through and kind of tagging like which players I have against my goalies to make sure I don't have them in the same lineup.
Correct. And that's something to look at too. So for example, if let's say you have Raul Ruidiaz, you're not going to play him against Mauer no matter what. So you're going to make sure that they are in separate lineups. Now, this does not matter as much for, like, let's say a center back or a defensive midfielder. But again, still their upside comes from that 10, 15% of games in the year that they score a goal. And therefore, if he scores a goal, you're going to generally kill your upside. So you try to avoid stuff like that as well. And similarly, and I do the same thing for attacking players. I know Alex has quite a few guys on DC United, so he's going to look. They're all hurt. Yeah. So if they weren't all hurt, he would look and be like, all right, DC United is not in a great situation. They're not a huge favorite. Now, let's say he had guys on Nashville. He's going to look and be like, all right, Nashville's a decent favorite here. I'm happy to play those guys. So, I generally will want to prioritize my Nashville guys over my DC United guys. Now, again, might not work perfectly that way, but that's generally how he'll look at it. So now we're going to get into discussing taking risks and how to avoid them. The biggest issue people have on this forum or on this platform, in my opinion, in terms of lineup creation, is they take unnecessary risks. An unnecessary risk to me is a player that may not play for whatever reason. That reason could be because he has COVID, or he's sick, or he has a little injury that could prevent him from playing, or we just found out the other day Andy Nahar for DC United does not play on synthetic turf fields. So
if that's what we think, that's what some things alluded to. And so far it's matched up. So we'll see if it continues today.
Correct. And they actually play on synthetic turf today. So Alex, I know, did not play him with the thoughts that he may not play this week on synthetic turf. So he's going to see if that is actually a theory that seems to make sense. So the key for people is to not make decisions based on that, because the thing is I've talked about before, you can make up a 35 to 45 point score. I have plenty of them. As you saw last week, we saw that I had a huge week last week, and I had some big games, and I finished third in All-Star Division 2 with Lars Veldwick, who had 47 points or 48 points. You can make something like that up. What is very difficult to make up and have a good performance is a 0-point game. So not only are you taking a risk with your player that is a risk, you're taking a risk with the whole lineup. So if you are prioritizing a lineup and you're playing a lineup with 4 guys you're sure are going to play, and then you throw a risk in there, you're realistically risking every single one of them, because if that guy does not play, that whole lineup is null and void for the most part. Not to say you can't win a card with that, or you could not do okay. It's totally reasonable, and it has happened. I've done okay where I've gotten cards with zeros. But I'll tell you what, there's been times where I had a 0 in a lineup that if that guy was a guy that had 35 points, I would have podiumed compared to getting a 20th place finish. So you don't need to be perfect when it comes to that. And you want to generally play guys that are going to play. So if you have another option, even if the one player might be theoretically better, but you're positive one guy is going to play versus another guy, you play him. So Alex, how do you do that with looking at these things? And then also, I know you have a bit smaller of a gallery, so sometimes you don't have options and you have to play someone that might be a bit of a risk. How do you sort of decide what lineup that person's going in?
Yeah, so a perfect example is Christian Dahome for the Whitecaps. I think it was 2 games ago. He hurt himself taking a penalty kick in extra time to win the game. It didn't look serious. He didn't practice much. He was questionable for the game. The issue is he was my only super rare forward in Americas for that game week. So I had a decision whether to play a lineup there, buy a new super rare forward, or not play him. So in the end, I took the risk thinking that he would at least be on the bench and play. So I submitted that lineup with them. He ended up coming on at 30. He didn't score, but he got something. But if I had another option, such as Kubo, my brilliant forward card, Kubo for Cincinnati, who does not go past midfield, I would have played that card because I know he starts every game and plays 90. So even though Dahome is a much better card, I would have played the inferior option there because I knew he was going to play. So that's kind of the thought process. It's always tough coming back from injuries because you don't really know what to expect. The injury reporting, the MLS is absolutely terrible. So sometimes you get some news in terms of this guy practiced some. He may or may not be on the injury list. Who knows? So really, I'm trying to wait until they come back and start a game before I consider starting them again. But sometimes you just don't have that option. But just tracking the injuries, if your guy got subbed off early, if there's any news that comes up, just being on top of that and not taking unnecessary risks. So another example, last night, our boy Chase Gasper got ruled out 10 minutes before the game due to like COVID protocols. So based on how those have gone in the past with MLS, that's typically been them missing like 2 games. So I know this weekend I am not going to play Chase Gasper in any of my lineups unless I get specific news saying he's cleared and will play, which is unlikely. So just staying on those type of things and making those decisions will get you ahead of the game.
Yeah, and here's a good example of like a decision that we might come up to later when we're making lineup and we're doing some mock lineups for Alex. As you see here, he has Chase Gasper. As you see, he's a bit better of a player. He does pretty well. In comparison to if we look down here, he also has Tanner Beeson. They're both defenders, both in the MLS, both have a game this weekend. We look at Beeson. As you can see, Beeson's not as good of a scorer. He does not do as well as what Gasper does. But I guarantee you when we come to this lineup construction later that Alex will be picking Tanner Beeson and over Gasper, won't even consider it playing Gasper. So it's decisions like that. Like let's say you are being lazy and you're not checking up on your news and notes and stuff, and you're just setting your lineup and you're just looking at this stuff and you're like, all right, well, Gasper's clearly better than Beeson. I'm going to play Gasper. Well, you just wasted your lineup. So it's all about not doing that and not wasting your lineup, especially when you don't have to. Now, that said, let's say Alex ends up in a situation where like he's running on fumes, his last few players are in a lineup, and he needs a super rare defender, and he has no other options. Yes, he might play Chase Gasper there because if he plays, awesome, that lineup is live. If he doesn't play, that lineup was dead anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So a lot of it's going to be coming down to things like that. The next thing to look at is, like we've talked about, using Sorare data. We both.
I had one more thing to add before we moved on, though.
Of course.
So another thing is just paying attention to fixture congestion, because a lot of the older players will get rotated out. Like I think we're both concerned that Nani doesn't start tonight, just because it's a midweek game. He's old. Like he'll probably come off the bench regardless and can still score a goal or two, but it's not ideal. So if I had a situation where I had all of the elite MLS attackers at my disposal, I probably wouldn't play Nani this game week, but I don't have that. So I did submit him in my America's 4 lineup, I believe. So just being aware and knowing there's a decision to be made is beneficial. And this goes into the unnecessary risk. Like a young center back is much less likely to get rotated in the midweek than like a 35-year-old striker.
Correct. Exactly. And I'm going to just run through too. So keeping up with news on players is huge. Alex and I both do it. We're both used to stuff like that, and from DFS reasons. But like, if you're not used to it, you should be Twitter searching every player, knowing if the players are going to play, follow along with previous games, know if someone went off with a knock. So I'm just going to go through here, for example, and look through some of my cards for this weekend. And I'm going to just keep it in America, and I'm going to show you like what my thought process is with America and why I'm not going to do certain things. So, for example, Nani, as Alex and I just talked about, we think he might get rotated in the midweek, but we're not positive. If he gets rotated in the midweek, I will play him with confidence in the weekend. If he does not get rotated in the midweek, I will be a little bit more wary of him.
Especially if he goes 90.
What?
If he goes 90,
if he goes 90, yeah, if he goes 90 in the midweek, I'll be a little bit concerned about him. Chicharito, I know, is coming back from injury, but I won't even consider him until he plays. So, like, this guy basically doesn't exist for me this week. Rui Diaz is fine. I know that Lucas Cavallini is injured and will not play, so I don't even consider him. Zardes, I know, will start most likely, so I will have him in my thought process. Adam Buxa, I know that there is opportunities for him to just sort of rotate at a whim's notice, so I will consider him because the matchup is good, but he might be a little bit lower priority for me. Brenner would be fine. Rossi is fine. Shabilko, I will probably play him, but I'm going to see what he does in the midweek. But he's been playing mostly 90s, so I'm very up to date with what he does. Chris Mueller, I know that he rotates in and out frequently. So, like, he's a guy that I try not to play if I have other options right now. I know Akinola has torn his ACL, so he won't be playing. I know Druisi got injured, and therefore he will not play. I know. What's up?
I didn't see that.
Yep. So he got injured in the game last week, so he may or may not play, but I just won't consider him until I know he's back in the lineup. Shinyashiki, I know he rotates in and out. Some games he plays, some games he does not. So I will not probably play him unless I have no other options. And similarly with Cal, Badgie, I just wouldn't consider anyways. Same thing with Komba, Fierro, Niesgoda, and Morse. But I also know, so here's a great example of like just knowing your gallery, knowing people. So I know Yaroslav Niesgoda is coming back from a significant knee injury, I believe, and he was on the bench this weekend. So I just know he's coming back from injury, so I need to just monitor what he's doing and what he's playing. So just by looking at this stuff, I know my gallery and know what to expect from these players. If I look at the midfield, for example, so I'm just going to go over players I know are banged up. I know Carlos Gil is banged up. I won't play him until I see him back in a lineup. I know Alan Cervantes is just back from the summer tournaments, and they rested him a bit. They rested him, and then he played in the weekend, but didn't play 90. So I probably won't consider him unless I don't have options. Mauricio Pereira is a guy like Nani. I'll treat him pretty similar to Nani. Or what I do with them is play them together. So if it tanks one line, it's not as big of a deal. Kevin Paredes rotates in and out, although he's been somewhat consistent lately. So I'll probably consider him, but maybe not prioritize. And then, like, looking back down for, like, Jesus Medina, you see scores well, does well, but I know they've been rotating him recently. So he's a guy I might not play due to that. Similarly, like, there's other guys like Kevin Molino, I know is sort of rotating in and out. Like, sometimes they're playing Alexander Matan. So anyways, that's just a brief, like, know your gallery, be familiar with like what is going on with players within your gallery, know what their injuries may be. And like, even like Alex's gallery, like if I look at Alex's gallery, I'm pretty familiar with most of his players. Like I don't have an Andy Nahar, but I know the Andy Nahar possibility of him not playing on synthetic. I know Yaroslav Rakitsky has been banged up and may not play. Similarly, I don't own one, but I know this. I know Donovan Pines has been injured. I do have him. I don't own a Chase Gaspar, but no, he missed the game due to code regulations. So anyways, it just goes to like the more you're aware and more you're familiar with what's going on, the easier these decisions are. And if you do not know them, you should probably like take looks at them, especially if you're playing guys in priority lineups that are very important. You should really know what to expect from them and if you can expect them to play or not.
Yeah, and you can use things like obviously Twitter searching, Google searching your players. Also, the Sorare Discord has a lot of information. You can even use the search feature to search for your player, and it'll kind of tag any mentions of your guy. It's a quicker way to access information than sorting through a lot of the great discussion that goes on in the Sorare Discord. But yeah, like Sean said, just being aware. And just knowing the limitations on news with the MLS kind of plays into risk management. So you know you're most likely not going to get what you need in terms of information to make the decision. So you have to make educated guesses and just kind of manage that risk with your decisions.
Definitely. All right. Next thing we'll talk about here is utilizing Sorare data and utilizing the tools that are presented to you. So I personally use the L5 and L15 frequently. And then also I like to know what teams they're playing so that I can know when I'm looking through the odds, who I'm looking for and stuff like that. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the other features and like what you utilize on this page in Sorare data when it comes to lineup building?
Yeah, I usually click on the show last 15 score button just because I like seeing the flow, the toggle at the top. That one, yeah. So I usually sort on this screen my last 15 just so I get my good players at the top. Really, I think a lot of the opponent data has to be taken with a grain of salt. It's useful, but to me, that's not the number one thing driving the decision. I think your player is going to dictate his outcome more so than the average opponent score of the opponent. However, it is a data point, and I think flipping through it kind of suggests that defenders on dogs can score better than like attackers on dogs. Do you generally agree with that? Have you seen that kind of show up in using the Sorare data?
Yeah, and I agree with you entirely about the fact that, like, take everything with a grain of salt. For example, a defender, a center back scores differently than a fullback scores, and a defensive midfielder scores differently than an attacking midfielder. So it's the opponent rating is going to just be general blanket of that position. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. But I definitely do notice that. And I have also noticed that, like, if you sort this way and you show the L15 scores so that you can see them, it shows you a good, like, diagnosis of, like, does my player play every game? Is he a guy that rotates in and out? So, like, for example, and no, you also have to take this with a grain of salt from some seasons are just starting. So, like, for example, the Russian league, these games are not from this season in the Russian league. So you may not care as much about it. But, like, for example, I can look at Shinosuke Hatanaka and I'm pretty confident that, like, he plays pretty much every game. So do you use that as well to diagnose things?
Yeah, definitely. And it also is pretty clearly shows out like the elite guys. Like Hatanaka is one of those anchor players we were talking about. There's really no matchup that I'd be scared to roll him out in, even if they are dogs. I mean, he's a great play. Also, the last 15 here getting mixed shows like the kind of the range of outcomes, and like someone like Fukumori, like who's kind of boom or bust. Like I like throwing those kind of players on like this kind of like the tertiary lineups I make, like the ones that are just like miscellaneous parts. Like I have the cards, I might as well submit the lineup type of thing, not the priority ones. And he can buoy those lineups. I don't want to use him in my priority lineup a lot of the time unless he has a pristine matchup because he does have the ability to tank it. Are you making those kind of considerations with your lineup? And how would you treat a player like Fukumori who can go from 40 to 100 yo-yo back and forth over a couple months?
Yeah, so actually I have his unique card. So that's a good person to talk about. So I would not necessarily remove him from a priority lineup for the reasons that you see he plays every game. So if you play every game and you have the ability to score decently, I am going to not put you in like a tertiary. I'm going to still prioritize you. But as you can see, like, he has some massive games, and they're generally going to be games where they are big favorites. So I don't prioritize him unless they're a big favorite. But what I do is I will play him a lot of the time in global, where it's harder to win and you need higher scores compared to that of Asia. So, for example, this game where he scored 100 points, I won Global All-Star D2 because I played him. Flip side, this game where he scored 100 points, I wasted him and didn't get any prize out of it. So it's definitely something that I consider and I look at. But if you play every game, and I'm not worried about you playing every game, like if you look at his scores, yes, there's a very wide range. Like compared to Hatanaka, who's just consistently good, or even some of these other guys, like you look at Kenneth Paul, consistently very solid. Fukumori's range is quite bigger. But if I look at this, he only has 2-3 games under 40 in his L15. All the games above 40 are fine and can be made up. So I still think he's fine, but I definitely will prioritize him more if they're a big favorite.
Yeah, and it's also different playing a rare card of his versus like the unique. Like you have the unique one, like you're generally going to play it. So there's a bit of a difference there. And like I don't play the Asia division usually, so I have limited defender spots in my global. So generally I'm not considering Fukumori over Hatanaka or Eduardo in a lot of cases. But if one of those got hurt, or if they weren't playing that week, I'd certainly consider him on a lot of game weeks.
Definitely. All right. And the next thing that we're going to talk about is how to prioritize your lineups and what regions to prioritize. It shocks me the amount of people that don't look at the prize pools each and every game week. For example, like there's been lots of talk in general Discord about U23 and how bad the prize pools have been. Now, that said, it's actually fixed a bit this week, but those people are still like running their most prioritized lineup in, for example, U23, and it does not make sense. You want to look at each and every game week. You go to the plays tab here, and you go to the upcoming game week coming up, and you want to look through the prize pools that are presented. The reason you do this is because you can see a landscape of what prize pools are going to look like. Now, that said, so if you have choices of where to prioritize things, Champion Europe prizes are better than U23 prizes, which are better than Global All-Star prizes, which are better than Champion America prizes, which are better than Champion Asia prizes. So if you have like a pure vacuum of like where you want to get your cards, you want to get your cards in Champion Europe if possible, but that's not always possible. And like, let's say you have a 70% chance of getting a card in Champion Asia Division 4 compared to a 20% chance of getting a card in Global All-Star Division 4. You might want to play Asia Division 4 to try to get a card. So what you do is you just use this tab and you start going through each and every division and seeing what is the strongest divisions and where you want to prioritize your cards. For me, I find that getting tier 1 and tier 0 cards are where I really want to prioritize because those are the most valuable cards. Do you find that the same way?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, it's going to, like, the prizes have fluctuated a lot, even game week to game week and division. Like, they're shaking things around. So, you definitely need to, like, continually be aware of where things are at. I always take a look closer to lock in terms of how many entrants each one has, how many places are paying out, with a specific focus on the higher tier payouts. Like a tier 3 reward, a tier 3 rare is okay, but it's not going to be something that's driving my decision making. Like if one division's paying out a larger chunk of like a higher tier or super rares, like that's where I'm going to want to target. And also just being aware of the tier details page and like understanding what you can win. So one of the reasons I don't play the Asia divisions is I really don't have much interest in receiving them as rewards. So if I have enough after I've made all my other lineups to submit an Asia 4 lineup, I will. But generally, I'm not, because those aren't the rewards I care about. I care about Challenger Americas, so that's where I'm going to prioritize.
Correct. And as Alex talked about, so for example, let's say Alex has a Challenger Europe Division 3 team. So he's going to come here. He's going to see that 36 people will get a tier 1 or better, and then 51 will receive at least a card. He's going to look up here and see that 295 people are entered into this region. So he can realistically think that like he's got to be in the top 50 of 300 people. As of now, things will change. Like he said, you want to check back closer to lock to make sure that that is the case. But what I find, I don't really care about that as much because I sort of have seen that stuff just remains consistent. So like, let's say that we go to Global All-Star D3 and let's look at Global All-Star D3 real quick. So Global All-Star D3 is 1,300 right now, and then Challenger Europe is 300. So like, let's say Challenger Europe goes to like 1,800. Well, or Global All-Star goes to 1,800. Then Challenger will probably go to, let's say, 400. So anyways, let's say Alex has a team that he can enter in Global All-Star Division 3, and he also could enter that same exact team in Challenger Europe D3. So he's going to look and be like, all right, there is 1,300 people in Division 3, 137 of which are getting a tier 2, 96 of which are getting a tier 1. That is not to say all of these lineups are going to be live, because some people will enter lineups that aren't going to compete. It just is how it is. You just don't know how many of those there will be. So he's going to mentally note that. Then he's going to go to Challenger Europe Division 3 and see that, okay, 51 people are going to get a card, 36 of which are going to be the coveted tier 1 or better, and there's only 300 people. So, for example, Alex is going to probably prioritize Challenger Europe Division 3 this weekend compared to that of Global. Now, let's say he has the same exact decision to make in America. He's going to look at America and see that there are 300 people in America, and he can get 30 places to get a tier 2 with 21 getting a tier 1. He might sit there and be like, all right, I have about a 10% chance to get a card, 8% chance that it's valuable that I actually want. And then I'm going to go back to Division 3 and Global, and he's going to be like, all right, I can get a 10% chance of getting a card with a 8% chance of getting a card I value. And he's going to decide whether or not he wants to prioritize America or Global. Each week, these prize pools change. For example, last week, Challenger Europe was on steroids based on how they had the prizes. So, like, I prioritized Challenger Europe over everything. So, I had a full Division 1 U23 stack that were all Challenger Europe players. I played them in Challenger Europe Division 1, not in U23 Division 1. So, you have to know what the prize pools are so you know what to prioritize. Would you agree with all of those things?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I saw that they're fixing the Challenger prize pools. It was an announcement that went out, but
they are. And I don't know if it happened or if they're still going to do it as it goes. But it's all right. Like, if I look at Challenger, like, I think if we just looked at those three regions, you would probably say Challenger of those three is going to be your priority over Global and over America. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And I typically prioritized Americas and Challenger over Global to, like, probably in a pretty extreme extent. Which I do want to ask you, do you think there's some validity if you have a really good rare team of running it in Global 4 just because of the type of rewards you could get if you had that, like, top 1% outcome? Or do you think it makes sense to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond and keep that what you view as an elite lineup in Americas or Challenger?
Yeah, so I think that the one exception to what we're talking about is Global All-Star Division 4. And the reason for that is because of the threshold. As everyone is aware, that the threshold is 205 points for 0.01 or 250 for 0.02. So the fact that you can hit that threshold and win a card is massive. And not to mention, like, this is the area where there are the most dead teams that cannot compete. So if you look at this 6,000 number up here,
yeah, 75% are dead. I mean, 25% are dead.
More than 25. I would even say 50 to 60% are dead lineups. So, like, you're getting 10% get a reward here. It's not really 10%. It's probably closer to 20% as of right now. So I think anybody on the platform that is not a massive, like, if you have a elite team in a better region, I would prioritize that region. For example, like, if you have an elite Champ Europe team, you should play it in Champ Europe D4. If you have an elite U23 team, you should probably play it in D4. Of that region. If you don't, and you have, like, an elite Asia team or an elite American team, you should play it in Global All-Star because, one, it should help you lock up the threshold, and two, it can still win you a card. Like, that's what people don't take into consideration the threshold enough. The threshold is a prize. So just by hitting it every single week, you're getting a prize. So if I'm everyone, like, let's say there are 10 game weeks a month between a midweek and a weekend slate, and you can win 0.02 ether every time. Let's say your gallery is good enough to win 0.02 ether every time. That's 0.2 ether over the course of the month. That's a lot. You can buy some pretty substantial cards with 0.2 ether over the course of the month. Like, you're talking a legitimate one or two very good players that you can get. Granted, they might not be in the region that is the best region, but I know for a fact you can get some U23, some Challenger Europe, some American, some Asian guys for 0.1 ether that are really, really strong and great values. So I think that people do not prioritize Global All-Star enough. And if the question is, like, should I put this lineup in Global All-Star or Challenger Europe D4, and then I'm not going to run a lineup in the other one, the answer is almost always play Global D4. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And one of the reasons why I've been prioritizing Americas and Challenger Europe is because I have some pretty decent Asia cards, Asia rares that I like running in Global 4, like the Hatanaka, Eduardo. There's a guy from Pohang that's really good and consistent. Like, those guys are super reliable, and because I think it makes more sense to play them there so I can save my higher end America's guy for America's 4 Whereas if I moved like my Nani and Boo and Price into Global 4, then I'm just kind of taking away the value of having those decent Asia cards because I'd be playing them in like those rares in like Global 3, probably with not great super rares because I'm prioritizing super rares in the other divisions. So that was kind of my thought process and trying to get the best utility out of my gallery where it's currently at.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so now we're going to sort of go into like the roster construction and the idea behind that. So we're going to use Alex's gallery. So one thing that people do that's also an error on the platform is creating quality or creating quantity lineups instead of quality lineups. If you make 3 good lineups, that is better than 4 mediocre lineups. And people don't do that. Now, that said, if you have some small decisions where like you have one lineup where if you make a small concession to that good lineup to make it like still good, but maybe like a slightly bit worse, and that gets you another lineup, you make that excess lineup. But if you have to, let's say, make one lineup into 2 lineups and it makes both of them useless, that doesn't help you. You effectively turn one lineup into 0, not one lineup into 2 lineups. So for you especially, Alex, because you have a gallery that's more conducive to having to make decisions like that, how do you go about stuff? And maybe let's start making some lineups on your gallery to see like what you're looking at for this weekend.
Yeah, if you want to click over to Americas. So my question to you is, where would you start in terms of priority in Americas? So I have enough super rares to run a lineup in 2, 3, and 4 in Americas. But the decision is, do I play like one of my best forward super rare, Dahome? Do I run that in Division 3 and pair him with like a Tanner Beeson at defense and then fill the midfield spot and utility spot with someone like Price and Nani and kind of go for prioritization of 3? Or do I just try to build the best possible Division 4 lineup with my rares and then take a look at where my super rares fit beyond that?
Yeah, so right now, looking through the prize pools, I think D3 is better than D2 this week. You have 21 chances at a tier 1 or better star, whereas Division 2, and this especially comes down to like Division 2s and Division 3s, only 5 people are getting a tier 2 or better, and you're probably going to see 100 or so lineups here, and only 1 person is getting like an actual decent card in a tier 1. So I think tier 2 tier Division 3 is better than Division 2. Similarly, I actually think this week, and it's not usually the case, I think Division 3 Global All-Star is better than America D2. So like, for example, like I would rather run a team in Global D3 than run a team in All-Star or in America D2. So like if you could save a couple super rares to make your Global All-Star D3 better, I would probably make that decision.
And that also works better because if D2 is going to be ultra competitive based on the payout structure, it's hard for me to compete with that because I don't have a lot of great super rares, especially when I get down to having to make a lineup with 4 of them. So I'm relying on people like Junior Moreno and Kubo to hit like 60 to 70, which isn't happening most of the time. So I think it does make sense to break apart the super rares and kind of target them to the D3s this week. So if we're looking at Champion America D3, where would you go in terms of super rare usage? Would you side for someone like using a Dahome in that, or would you go for the kind of more of the floor super rares to fill it out with more of the better rare cards in this lineup?
Yeah, so looking through your gallery, we are going to assume that Dahome is going to start. Again, this comes back to our not taking risks and stuff, but he was injured here. He came on as a sub and played 30 here. We're pretty sure he probably comes back in the starting lineup because you say that he's a guy that plays every game. So he's pretty important. So
yeah, I'm assuming today he comes in and plays like 75 and then starts again in the weekend. But like if he comes in today and plays 90, I'd be a little bit more hesitant. Also, if he comes in today and plays like 60, I'd be a little shaky on like if they're just managing his load moving forward. And obviously, if he comes off the bench here and then plays another 30, and it looks fine. I think he's like full go for the next game. But
correct. So like looking through this, we will first I like to eliminate guys that I'm not going to play in any chance. So as of right now, I won't play Gaspar. I would not play Canus. I would not play Sebastian Blanco, although he's probably getting to a point where you consider him, but I'm not going to play him unless it's a necessity to play him, and then I'm not going to play Rodney Redis.
Yeah, also Allen for Atletico has been hurt. That's
correct.
why he missed last game.
And so, for example, that is something he knows about his gallery that I do not know. Other things I know about his gallery, but I didn't know that. So that's a great comment about knowing your gallery, knowing the ins and outs. So I would also then not play Alon. So Paul Arriola, however, you guys might be like, oh, are you going to play him? You have a lot of DNPs. All of these were based on him being at the Gold Cup. So just remove all of them from your thought process. So he's effectively going to play and not have to worry about it. So for me here, probably I would prioritize. Now, this said, this is also comes into factor with like if you have elite forwards, you might not play a Dahomey here because you might want to play a elite forward. But for me here, I would probably play a either Tanner Beeson, Cascante, Delgado, and then Dahomey. And the reason I'm going to do that is I'm going to try to probably keep Arriola and Junior Moreno together. Their correlation isn't going to be super strong, but with two players on the same team, there's always the possibility they connect with a decisive that you have to factor in. Like, granted, that might be a 1% chance, but it's still a 1% higher chance than Junior Moreno can mark Delgado for one.
And they did link up, I believe, the game before Arriola left for the Gold Cup. So you see, like, that's a pretty good correlated outcome right there. Like that plays. But yeah, I had the same four too. So my decision was Delgado, Dahomey, Cascante, and Beeson. And I think I like Cascante better than Beeson.
And see, for me, I think I would play
fairly close.
Yeah, for me, I think I would play Beeson because I think that you don't need as good of a score in Champion America as you might need in Global. So, like, I don't know if he would play well in Global. So, actually, there's a chance I might just move Dahomey to Global. But you also will probably have better forwards as options in Global than you would here. So, for me, like, there's a possibility I might even play Cascante and Beeson here. But I think for me, I would probably play one of the defenders, one of the forwards, or Mark Delgado. So what was your decision process here? Why don't you run through what you're thinking your lineup will be here?
Yeah, I haven't quite made up my mind yet. The thing is, I have Nani, Boo, and Price. So if you load up my rares, like, do you want to go, and also Saloy, who's a good option as well. So do I want to get I want to get two of those in this lineup, obviously.
Correct. But here's another thought process too, right? Everybody is that his D3 lineup is not going to be that strong. And the reason is his super rares here and his options are not that strong. So he may not want to use his best forward or his best midfielder. So, for example, I'm assuming he thinks Jack Price and Roldan are his best midfielders. And I'm going to assume he thinks like Nani and Boo are his best forwards, followed by Shaloy. So what he might do here is he might play Shaloy over Nani and Boo, save them for a better lineup because he knows that lineup has a better chance to win.
Yeah, so my initial run through my lineups, I prioritized America's 4. And I had Nani, Boo, and Price in 4, and then paired them with Mueller and Hollingshead.
Yes.
So
as you see, we're going to go through here, and he's going to prioritize Nani, Boo, and Price here with Hollingshead, who we know can score well, and Mueller, and they have an okay matchup for themselves. And if they get a clean sheet, it's pretty decent chance that these guys get a clean sheet. And then I assume you're captaining Nani.
Yeah, it was either Nani or Price, but probably Nani just because you're looking for that high-end outcome. So, I mean, I think this kind of lineup can be extremely competitive in America's 4, and I think this was pretty close to the same lineup where I just got like fifth a couple game weeks ago. So, I mean, that's my thought to prioritize this lineup first, and then that takes away a lot of the decisions in Division 3.
And that's something you guys will learn too, is as you prioritize things and you remove players, you're going to have less options, and therefore you don't have to make as many decisions. So what is your next priority lineup that you have?
It would be 3.
All right. So we go to Champion America D3, and then what do you have in there?
I believe I had Dahome and Cascante.
What about the goalkeepers and the rest of the lineup?
I probably had Malia in here.
Okay, so we have Malia in here, Cascante. And then midfielder, I'm thinking you probably had Roldan or Santos.
Yeah, I had Roldan.
All right, so Roldan, and then you're looking at Dahome, and then you're going to look for your utility player, your extra. And so, for example, like he's not going to use Pedro Santos in this lineup, most likely due to the fact that he has Christian Roldan. The correlation isn't as drastic between them and like goalies and forwards or like defenders and forwards, but I'm assuming he probably still would not make that choice.
Yeah, I had Soloy, even though I typically think playing 2 forwards is not the approach. It's a little bit different in MLS with like these level players that are like too good for the league and they score so often. That I think that's the right approach if you're prioritizing.
Correct. So anyway, so that's just a couple lineups that we want to go through and give you sort of like a thought process with like how to create the lineup. So like now, as Alex looks at things, he looks at D2 in America, and like he's not going to play a bunch of rares because you can't obviously, and he's going to have less options. I guess I didn't save it, but you're going to look. He's only going to have like Mark Delgado, Moreno, Areola as realistic options. So what he's probably going to do is use some of these guys in global and not make a D2 lineup. Whereas, for example, he could make a D2 lineup that is like a goalie, Delgado, Areola, Kubo, and that lineup's probably not going to be super competitive. Now, that said, if all of those players are remaining at the end, he's 100% going to make that lineup so that it's live. So anyways, that's just some lineup discussion to go for. The next thing I want to talk about is like plugging gaps with your team. People do this on the platform quite a bit, and I think a lot of the times it is not worthwhile, and people are just sort of wasting money for no reason. But there are times that it does make sense, and I have one from last week where it made a lot of sense. So the key for this is you got to look at the prize pools. Let's say that you have a super mediocre lineup for Division 4 in America, that if you get another midfielder, your lineup is going to be usable. So you're going to look at the prize pool. There is only 10 possible cards that really are going to provide over 0.1 ether, I would in expected value. And there are 1,200 people in Division 4 America. So you going out and spending, let's say, 0.1 ether on a card that just does not contain tons of value is just sort of wasting money. Now, that said, if you want to go out and get a player that you think you will use going forward, that can provide quite a bit of value because it's a great time to bring them in because you can use them in a situation where they're very needed. Do you agree with that? And is that sort of how you approach like bringing people in? And over the summer, there was tons of times where I'm like, hey, I could bring someone in, but I looked at the prize pool and I was like, it's not worth it, and just didn't enter a lineup in that week. So do you look at it that way when you're making your decisions?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of the times when you're plugging gaps, it's going to be during the midweek when there's fewer games. And obviously fewer games means reduced prize pool. So like Sean said, you definitely want to look at the prize pools because a lot of times it's not worth it. However, like if you need like one card to be able to enter some like wonky requirements for a weekend challenge and it's like 0.03 ETH, go for it. Get that guy. I think I bought Michael Bradley for like 0.04 a couple weeks ago just so I can have a live lineup in the weekly challenge. Like that's well worth it to me. But if you're buying someone at a premium that doesn't align to your overall strategy of playing the game, you might get stuck holding the bag on that person, and bringing them in for one game week just so you have one extra lineup to sweat is not worth it. But again, like Sean said, if it aligns to your strategy and it's kind of a long-term piece and you're just deciding when to do it, when you need them to get an active lineup in, that's definitely good timing. But you just want to consider those different factors.
And a perfect example for me too is last week. So again, look at the prize pools. I looked at the prize pools last week, and if you look at the weekly special last week, they gave away 102 cards, 67 of which were tier 1 card or a super rare T3 or better. So by looking at it, when I looked at things, there was like 160 people in there. So I had a lineup that I had Costas Lamprou and Albert Gudmundsson, and then 2 other players that were like, there was only like 2 goalies that were playable in the special last week, and I had one. And then there were like 3 other guys that I had that were fine, that were going to start for sure. So I looked at the weekly special, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, I'm going to get a card, like a 98% chance of getting a card if I get a midfielder that makes sense. And similarly, I'm going to get a super rare a lot of the time, which generally like a tier 2 super rare is probably going to be worth at least like 0.2 to 0.3 ether, if not higher. And so I was sitting there, and it's like I have like a 30 to 40% chance of getting a tier 2 super rare or better if I just do this and buy this person. So what I did is I went to Sorare data, and I sorted and looked into the player rankings, because it had to be they had to average under 40 points over their last 5 games. So last week was a Dutch league situation where I needed a midfielder, and so I sorted based on last 5, and I scrolled down and I looked through everyone that came in. So I looked and I was like, Van de Streek probably won't start, I don't want him. Ashill won't start, don't want him. Ramselaar won't start, don't want him. I am interested in DeWitt, but I looked and I was like, his price is too expensive, I don't really want that. Similar with Boussaid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I eventually came to Dean Huiberts, who, as you see now, his last 5 is 51. But if I click on him, I look at his scores, and he did not finish the season last year, but I looked through every single one of their friendlies, and he was playing 90 minutes in every friendly. So I was pretty confident that he was going to start. And if you look through his games last year, like you see a guy that he played 90 and good minutes a lot. Did he score great? No, never really. He scored just okay. But I knew that if I had a guy like this, I'm going to get a tier 2 super rare or better, most likely. So I looked, his price was 0.049 on the market. And I know if I get a tier 2 super rare, I'm going to probably get 0.2 to 0.3 ether or more. So I just decided to buy Dean Huiberts. Will I ever use him again? I have no idea. I don't necessarily think I'll ever use him again, but hey, they could end up in a random thing where I could use them again. So I look, and as you see, I finished 3rd in the weekly special. This is actually, if you guys watched the last show we did earlier in the week, I was winning this when I woke up, and then there was a stat correction that moved me to 3rd. But if you look at my gallery, you're going to see I got a super rare that was equivalent to that made sense. So I believe I got a Leo Gramel that goes for about 0.6 ether from filling that one gap. So it was well worth it for me. Do you agree, Alex?
Yeah, certainly. So I think a lot of people overlook the weekly special, because before they did the revamp on the rewards, the weekly special was pretty terrible in terms of how many prizes were available. So I would definitely take a look at it each week at the requirements. Sometimes it's like over 30-year-old guys with scores under 50. Like there's some random requirements, but take a look at it. And if you're close to being able to submit a lineup, that might be a situation where it makes sense to buy an extra card to plug a gap, because there might be a decent chance that you can win a card there, because of the requirements restrict a lot of people from being able to enter those.
Yeah, definitely. So did you look at this week's special, Alex?
I hadn't yet, but it looks like it's Serie A. So that's a pass for me. But if it was Belgian league, I'd be full bore on that and kind of potentially prioritize it just because of the way that they are structuring the prizes now. They're paying out a lot more spots, and I don't think people are looking at it or putting any kind of priority cards in those kind of lineups. So it might be a situation where you can prioritize something that nobody else is prioritizing, and obviously that will give you a better chance to finish. And really, when you're submitting a bunch of lineups, you really just want one or two to have a live shot. Like, you're not expecting all of your lineups to cash. So if you can prioritize your cards in a place where you have a better expected value, that's taking advantage of the utility of your gallery to the fullest. So definitely some things to think of when you're kind of prioritizing where you want to play your cards.
Definitely. And like if you look like this week, there's currently 79 people in the special weekly and 92 people are getting a card. So if you have the ability to enter a lineup in the weekly special, you should do it this week because you're going to get a card. Even if you put in fractions of players and you have like 2 or 3 guys, it might be good enough to get a card. Now, that said, I myself will look at what I have available here. I do not have a goalie because Tatsaron is not going to play. I know because I've looked at it already that there is like 1 or 2 goalies that are eligible to play. It's like Merritt is eligible, Musso's eligible because he played in the summer in like the Euros and he didn't start, so he just had a bunch of DNPs that tanked him. And then I look at defenders. I do know I have at least 1 defender who will probably play, maybe 2 with Vojvoda. And then if I look at the midfielders, I definitely have a midfielder or 2 that will play at least. And then similarly, like forwards, I don't think Maldini will play at all, but he could maybe see the game. But so what you want to do is if you have a team that's competitive here, you want to play it. Now, that said, myself personally, am I going to go out and buy a goalie and a forward that fits this bill? Probably not, because that's going to cost me a lot. So what do you have eligible for this week, or you don't really have any Serie A cards to consider it?
I don't have any. I had a Godin during the summer to use during like some summer tournaments, but I sold him off. He was my lone Serie A card, I believe. So
definitely. So it's definitely something to look at. Every week you should be looking at the prize pools, especially the weekly special. The weekly special recently has been fantastic, where you're going to get a lot of cards by playing it. So make sure you do it. Submitted gaps, make sure you're precautious about it. So the last thing we're going to talk about from week to week basis, and something that will help you as things go, is submit training lineups. It can be burdensome. But each week that you play your training lineups, these guys are increasing their XP. If you increase every player's XP by 1 XP, that means each lineup you have on every given weekend is probably getting 2 to 4 points more than what it would have got if you did not do that. That might sound like not very much, but if you can add 2 to 4 points a lot, you're going to see yourself. That's going to be the difference between a card and no card, tier 2 and tier 1, tier 1 and tier 0 over time. So even though it may be burdensome, you got to make sure you do it. As you see, like mine are set this week, so I just have to confirm them. Once I make my lineups, that will not be the case, and I'll have to go through and recheck them. But a lot of Sorare and a lot of things in general are all about effort. If you are putting in effort, you are going to be more successful than someone that is putting in no effort. As you have seen, a lot of the things that Alex and I have talked about today have included effort. And I know Alex and I pride ourselves on being 2 guys that put in a lot of effort in things. So what would you say about being out-efforting people and how important that is? Because for me, out-efforting is more important than almost anything on this platform in terms of finding good deals, making lineups, training lineups, and doing things like that. So what do you think when it comes to effort and what people should do?
Yeah, I mean, so different people have different situations. Not everybody has the opportunity during the day to check in on their team so much, so that maybe they still want to play, but they're really busy. They have a day job, family, and it's tough for them. But if you want to be competitive long term, these incremental things you do each game week add up to like massive returns in the long term. So I would say, like, if you're going in the platform and buying a lot of cards, like, these are the things you need to be doing each and every week, or else you're just giving away a competitive edge to somebody else. And it'll be interesting to see longer term as the platform scales and when these divisions grow, if there is an influx of more bad lineups because you have more casual people playing. It'll be an interesting thing to see how it plays out. Or maybe you get the more adoption of guys like yourself who are into it pretty deep and making better lineups. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. But definitely, if you're serious about it, you have to do these things like going through and clicking your training lineups each week. There's also the added benefit of doing that. It allows you to keep an eye on your gallery and kind of get a reminder of who you have. I know every once in a while when I'm submitting training lineups, I'll see a name that I haven't played in a while. It kind of gives me a cue to check in on them. Like Archer for the crew who's been hurt, like say in beginning, like 2 months, I'll submit a training lineup with him in it. Maybe I'll see that name and kind of I'll do a Google search to see kind of how his status, and maybe he's returning soon at the end of the season. So there's just things that there are some kind of auxiliary benefits of familiarizing yourself with your lineup and staying in touch with it. But I believe the training is going to change on the platform at some point, but we don't know what. But for now, it's kind of the system, and just click through and make all the training lineups you can.
Yep, 100%. So that's going to wrap it up. That is about all we wanted to touch base on in regards to lineups and how to sort of make decisions that could help everyone going forward. Apologies if there was any dogs barking throughout the video. I try to keep them under control, but for some reason, my wife gets like 8 FedEx packages a day from Amazon. So sometimes that can be a bit difficult. Alex, is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up for this week?
I'm good. Good luck, everybody, this game week, and I'll be back next week.
Yep. All right. As Alex said, make sure you use some of these tips when creating your lineups. It can be really helpful going forward. I think everyone will see significant improvements with their own gallery if they can make decisions like that. So again, everyone, if you check the link in the description, if you are new, make sure to check that. You can sign up for Sorare using that link, and you will receive a free limited card on the purchase of 5 cards at auction. And if you haven't checked out our previous videos with me and Alex and my other guests, make sure that you check those out. That's been a great introductory to Sorare and how to approach things. So good luck, everyone, this game week and this weekend. We'll be back next week. I think I'm going to have a special guest on Monday before Alex comes back on Wednesday. And our theme next week may be having someone that has a major gallery and like what decisions they end up having on a week-to-week basis. And then followed up on Wednesday by Alex and I sort of going into the complete opposite end of the spectrum of what buying on a budget should look like and what you should be considering when doing things like that. So it'll be a great way to hit both ends of the spectrum next week. So make sure you're on the lookout for that. For Alex, I am Sean. Good luck, everyone. We will see you next week.